Hi everybody, welcome to IndyCar on the 9th of July. I'm Gordon Ross. Today's show is largely about the difference between truth and belief. Truth, as we know, is the facts of the matter, the things that are set down in stone, the things that you see around you, that you can experience with your own eyes, your own ears and your own first-hand experience. And you compare that to belief or opinion. These are things manipulated and manufactured in order to steer our beliefs around so that we actually believe things which are completely false, basically. Now, the reason I mentioned this morning is that if you're like me, you've been forced to watch the television recently and have accidentally had the misfortune to listen to Jeremy Hunt or Boris Johnson pontificating in Scotland about what they're going to do to the Scots and how they're going to put us all in our place, you would think that Westminster had absolute power over everybody in Scotland. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that, because most of the audiences in these question and answer sessions are handpicked by the media to contain no people who want independence. So if you're incredulously listening to Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt saying that nobody in Scotland wants an independence referendum, that the majority of people don't want another divisive independence referendum, even those people who voted for independence don't want an independence referendum, and you hear a whole crowd of people clapping and applauding, you might be forgiven for thinking, what the hell is going on? Because the people in Scotland don't feel that way at all. And you'd be right, because the people in that audience are hand-picked, especially to clap when Jeremy says something like that. So what we're seeing in front of us on the TV and in the media is a pantomime. It's a pantomime that's designed to give Scots the impression that they're losing, that they can't possibly win against the might of the British Empire, and that we should all just give up and go back into our box and do nothing about it. Now, they've tried this before. They've done this repeatedly, both before and since the independence referendum in 2014, and that has continued right up to the present day. The problem is that the truth of the matter is that the Tories, who never wanted devolution in the first place, were forced to watch it happen because Labour had painted itself into a corner. In order to win enough votes in Scotland, they had to promise the Scots something which had been asked for decades, and the Scottish Constitutional Convention had found a majority in favour in Scotland in favour of having a Scottish Parliament. So the Scottish Parliament was duly created by the British Labour Party in London, and it was created to be a cage, or a dog chain if you like, something which would give the Scots a little taste of freedom, just enough to keep them happy, but always having that choke chain on them to pull them back from actually ever becoming a country again. So they created it, right? And the truth of the matter is that they created a parliament which works. Not only does it have powers, but they specifically gave it powers to make decisions on matters concerning Scotland. That's basically what its remit was. So they've actually created a working parliament in Scotland, for Scotland as a country, which makes decisions purely on matters which are of importance to Scotland. They have tried to claim that devolution or the Constitution or constitutional matters are not within the remit of the Scottish Parliament. Now that's completely bogus, because in all the centuries since the Acts of Union were signed and sealed and Scotland became a part of a union with England and Scotland's Parliament sat with the English Parliament, at no point was Scotland ever consumed into the new country. It's still Scotland, it's still a country, still has a parliament, and it still has a parliament representing Scotland in Westminster. But it never really was extinguished. And not only that, but all the laws passed since in England to try to make sure that we're all British, in inverted commas, these are English laws, because there is no such thing as British law. There is English law and there is Scottish law. English law says all the Scots have become British. Well, that's fine in England, but in Scotland it doesn't apply, because English laws don't apply north of the border. So we are not British. The English can call us British, they can claim that legally we are British, but in Scotland we're not. And this is the problem. And Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt are trying to give Scots the impression that we have no power, and that our parliament is a pretend parliament, a playtime parliament which has no powers at all, and you can't do anything about what the Tories want to do. And they're going to shut you out of the negotiations with Europe, and they're going to put somebody like Ruth Davidson in place of, say, Nicola Sturgeon, who actually runs Scotland, in favour of Ruth Davidson, who's polling at 11%, one of the worst performing Tory leaders in Scotland ever, really. So the Tories are basically saying no matter what Scotland wants to do, England trumps it, and the Tories will ride roughshod over it, and they can do whatever they like, and Scotland can't do anything about it. But the truth of the matter is, they know that Scotland has always got, and has always had, the democratic power in its own parliament to call a referendum on whether it wants to stay in the union with England, because it is purely a Scottish matter. It can't be claimed to be a constitutional matter because England has no constitution. Scotland has got a constitution, and its constitution is based on a document from 1320 and also on the Claim of Right from last year. So Scotland has the constitutional high ground here. Not only has it got the high ground, but it has the power to call a referendum at any time. The only reason that England is upset, and I say England, I mean the Tories who run England are upset about this, is because the referendum in 2014 was provided by the British government. It was suggested by the Tory Prime Minister, David Cameron. He was the one who came up with the idea. He was the one who nearly ended up causing the breakup of the United Kingdom. That gave the British establishment a gigantic scare. They've almost had a coronary when Scotland's yes vote reached 51%. Just a few days before the vote, they were wetting themselves. The sale of Pampers across England shot up. Figures for Pampers went up through the roof because people were scared. Mostly the Tories were scared. It was at that point that they realised just how powerful sovereign Scots votes are. And since then they've been trying to convince us that we don't have this power. But the problem is we still do. And not only do we still have it, but as long as Holyrood remains open, and as long as we have an SNP government, and as long as we have Green politicians and socialist politicians and others who are not members of the British political system, we will always have the right to hold a referendum. Now, just because it's not been given the permission, in inverted commas, of the English government, that is the British government in Westminster, doesn't mean that we don't have the power to call it. The daft thing about all of this is, eventually, I think that we will probably not have a referendum, because the amount of trouble that it causes the Tories when we keep threatening a referendum keeps them running around in circles trying desperately to stop the hemorrhage of Tory support in Scotland and to stop the growing groundswell of popularity of the independence idea. So it works in our favour to keep telling them we're going to have a referendum, but in actual fact the best way for us to get independence is probably to have a general election at Holyrood where we do have the power, and also where we have a voting system which includes 16 and 17-year-olds and all European Scots. All of those people are contained inside the electorate of Scotland, and those are the ones who we really need to get on side. If we were to peg the whole independence question to a British general election, then it's being run by the British establishment, and it's wide open to tampering. We have seen time upon number that the postal voting system being rigged in all kinds of different ways in English by-elections and also in our own referendum in 2014. It was heavily rigged, nothing was done about it. Even the Tory leader was accused of a criminal offence of vote tampering and got away with it simply because she was the Tory leader in Scotland. So what I'm saying here is that our best chance really of getting our independence, not our independence, but just basically separating ourselves from England and basically just saying the union is finished. That 300-year-old document we signed, forget it, you've broken it. You broke it several times, but basically Brexit was the biggest transgression of all. You cannot have a treaty with a country that you can't trust. to do your foreign affairs correctly. And England just didn't represent Scotland's foreign affairs in Europe. England has decided to Brexit, not Scotland. England and Wales decided to leave. Northern Ireland and Scotland decided to stay. Even the Labour Party, believe it or not, in Scotland has finally woken up and realised that them doing the Tories' dirty work in 2014 caused them to become as popular as a fart in a spacesuit. And because of that, the bold Richard Leonard has decided now to come out and say that the Labour Party in Scotland will no longer fight against independence alongside the Tories. Now, first of all, it looked as if they were not going to fight against independence anymore, and then I read the headline again, and what they're basically saying is they're going to continue to try to stop Scotland voting to end the Union, but they're just not going to do it on behalf of the Tory party. Whether that makes any difference to you or not makes no difference to me. The Labour Party is still a unionist party. And Richard Leonard has nailed his colours to the mast and said, we made a bit of a cock-up by working with the Tories the last time. We realised that's made us really unpopular. So don't worry, the Labour Party's got it all in hand. We are going to save the Union and we're going to represent Scotland. What a load of baloney that is. The Labour Party did precisely nothing for 80 years in Scotland, presided over the poverty in Scotland for all of that time, did nothing to alleviate it, did nothing in terms of policy about it. When they were in power in Holyrood, did nothing about it either. So my own feeling, for what it's worth, is what Chris McElhenney and I can't remember the other guy's name, I'm sorry, I'll come back to you on that, but the two SNP politicians who have put forward the idea that our future, the future of the Union, should be tied directly to either a Scottish general election or a UK general election, and that should be not a mandate for another referendum, but a mandate to say the Union is over, Scotland has had enough, and as far as we're concerned, we voted to end the Union with England, and now you must negotiate with us. That's the only way to really get the independence that we need, and get it done now, because if we wait for a referendum next year, it will be too late. We all know it will be too late because the Tories have said they're going to strip Scotland of its powers. Jeremy Hunt has said repeatedly that he would shut down devolution completely. He's said it, he's on record as having said that. He would shut down the whole devolution system across the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, including Wales. And now we have the Welsh Labour leader saying that if Scotland votes for independence, then he thinks Wales ought to consider it as well. This coming from a Labour politician in Wales. Now, no wonder the Tories are scared when a Labour politician in the Welsh Valleys is saying that Wales should start looking to become independent after Brexit as well, if Scotland does it. Everybody's waiting to see what Scotland will do. And what Scotland needs to do is have its own election, because in a Scottish election, we run the election in Scotland with our system, with our ballots, with our bizarre extra vote system that the Labour Party put in place to try and keep Scotland from getting an SNP government. But remember, the SNP thwarted the system completely in 2015 and got an overall majority in Holyrood. Immediately after the independence vote was lost, the SNP became fantastically popular. Now that tells you something, that the real vote for independence would have won had it not been for the cheating, the gerrymandering, the vote tampering and all the other dirty tricks that were done in 2014. We would have won it because in 2015 people voted in the Scottish election for a majority SNP government. Now that's supposed to have been impossible under the system that we've been given. If we can do it in 2015, we can do it in 2019. If we have another general election in Scotland at Holyrood on the basis of one single issue, and that one issue is for the union with England to be ended, for us to withdraw from the union. If that is the one issue, and the parties, the SNP and perhaps the Greens and the Socialists, anybody else who wants to be involved in an alliance, the one issue is going to be, if we win a majority of seats in first past the post, or if we win an overall majority, then we end the union. That's it. We will stop cooperating with England. We will withdraw all our MPs from the Westminster Parliament, and we will demand negotiations immediately to end the union with England. Now that is something that can be done by us, controlled by Scotland, by its own systems, under its own laws. Nothing that the Westminster Prime Minister can do can change the fact that under Scottish laws we can make legislation to make that happen. There is nothing anywhere I've seen that says that Scottish law can be overwhelmed by English law in Scotland. They tried to do it with the powers coming back from the European Union, the 111 powers that were grabbed by Westminster that should have returned to Scotland because they were not covered by devolution. The British government cheated, tried to take Scotland to court to prevent that happening, and then created its own law which snatched back the laws while we were tied up in this court action. The court action was not conclusive. It didn't say that Scotland had no right to make legislation. It just delayed the legislation so much that the British government could create its own new legislation to snatch the powers back. But in the case of the Union, that can't be done, because the Union involves two countries, two signatories to a document. No matter what laws England has passed since 1707 to pretend that Scotland is somehow part of a new country, they can't, because Scotland is in a union, and we need to keep saying this. It is a union. It is not a country. Scotland has never been part of a country. It has always been part of a union with one other country, and the one other country being England. Scotland's not in union with Great Britain, it's not in union with the UK, and it isn't British. Scotland is Scotland. It is what it is. And when we do have our own election, which we should have very soon, I hope, then we can prove that, and we can prove that with a massive ringing endorsement equal to or greater than the huge majority that was won in 2015. And I predict that with all of Europeans and most of the 16 and 17-year-olds wanting to remain in Europe and wanting Scotland to end its union with what is about to become an isolated Brexit land, I believe that we will get probably the largest majority ever got in Holyrood. But we must not allow ourselves to believe the rubbish that is coming from the BBC and ITV and STV and other media outlets and newspapers across the country. The only possible exception to that might be The Independent and iScot magazine and one or two other publications which are not anti-independence. I say not anti-independence. I know that The Independent boosts its sales by saying it's pro-independence, and it's always tried to present itself that way. But it is owned by a newspaper group which is British, and we always need to remind ourselves that every now and again a little bit of Britishness will creep into the editorial. So what I'm saying to you is, don't believe what you see on the media. Don't believe what you see on the BBC. Certainly do not believe anything that Boris or Jeremy say to this hand-picked audience of Tory voters in a Tory-run country of England by a tame media which is run by the Tories, paid for by us, unfortunately. We're paying to get propaganda. It's ridiculous. We pay to have a propaganda company pumping rubbish onto our screens. Don't believe it, okay? Believe what you see and what you hear and what you experience yourself, because those are the facts, those are the true things. Don't be fooled by the dissonance of the television. It's rubbish. We know it's rubbish. It's been getting progressively more and more hysterical as time goes on. More and more threats, more and more aggressive kind of rhetoric coming from both Johnson and Hunt. They're having competition to see who can bash the Scots the most. And don't let people call you a nationalist if you're not a nationalist. If you just support independence, then you say, no, I'm not a nationalist. I'm just an ordinary Scot who wants out of the Union. I want the Union ended because I don't believe that England has a right to our resources, and I don't think that England has a right to rule us when we are a country in our own right. That's not being a nationalist. That is being a realist. You want to be out of this mess of Brexit. You want Scotland making its own decisions with a competent government and a legal government which works for Scotland. It doesn't work for anybody else. Remember, we're giving away almost half of our tax money to England every single year. We never see it again, and we never get any benefit from it. The only things they use it for are to pay for nuclear weapons, to pay for the wars that they are about to start again, and for the luxury lifestyles of the politicians and their queen and their royal family and all the rest of the pageantry that we up here reject. Anyway, that's it for today. Just remember that the British media is here to fool you into thinking that you have no power. But north of Hadrian's Wall, we have the power. We can call a general election at Holyrood any time it's needed, and we can make the subject of that that election withdrawing from the Union. And by doing so, we can get the independence we want without any recourse to asking permission or asking for Section 30 orders or having recourse to going to referendums. The referendum is a dead duck. It is a red herring. We're chasing rainbows with this. But it's good because it keeps the Tories running about, worrying about referendums and trying to stem the calls for referendums. But really, we're not going to get our independence that way. We have to take much more direct action. But remember, focus on what's really in front of you. Focus on the way Scotland really is, how it looks, how it sounds, how it feels, and what you see and hear around your personal experience is reality. Television, it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy created by the British government to make you think that you have no power. We hold all the cards in this argument, and all we have to do is exert the powers that were given to us in Holyrood when it was created and use them. Use them to do what we know we need to do. We need to take the last step. Independence is the next logical step from devolution. Devolution has proved that we can run our own country. Devolution has proved that we can form a working, competent, in fact more than competent government, probably one of the few competent governments actually anywhere in the Western Hemisphere at the moment. We've proved that we can do that. We've proved that we can run the country on a fixed budget without borrowing, without getting into debt, and without running up a deficit. How many other countries can do that? None. Virtually nobody else can do it but us. Now, if we can't afford to be independent now, there is never going to be a time when we can afford to be independent. This is the time. This is the high watermark in Scotland's abilities, its legal rights, its enthusiasm, its confidence. And if we do this right and we gather everyone in Scotland together to vote in a general election, we will win. Far better than waiting for a Tory to give us permission to have our own vote on our own constitutional future. I'll see you later. Have a good day. Bye-bye.